And good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here, and I would just like to thank the Homeland Security and Defense Forum and Mr. Aguilar for the invitation to host and moderate this panel. Very excited to be here this afternoon. We're going to be changing gears a little bit and talking more about the ports of entry and some of the transformative technology that's being used to help secure the border at those 328 ports of entry. The title, of course, is Technology Enhancing CBP's Cargo and Trade Mission, and we will have a few minutes for questions towards the end. Joining us today, again, is the founder of Dejero, a global critical connectivity company. Bogdan Frusina understood that relying on a single connection for situational awareness, critical communications, and emergency response leaves you vulnerable. So over the past decade, Dejero has developed innovative products and solutions that deliver reliable and secure connectivity anywhere. So thank you, Bogdan, for joining us. Mr. P. Flores, immediately to my left, is the Executive Assistant Commissioner for the Office of Field Operations, the largest operational component within CBP, with over 31,000 uniformed and non-uniformed officers deployed at the 328 ports of entry, executing on the counterterrorism, anti-narcotics, trade enforcement, agriculture, trade and travel missions. So Pete has quite a bit on his hands. So thank you for Pete for being here today. And just as we set the stage for the environment that they operate within the ports of entry, just to give everyone an idea on the challenges that are faced, in a typical day, 1.1 million legal border crossers through the ports of entry. So that's about 350,000 through the airports, about 700,000 by land, and about 78,000 by sea. So 1.1 million a day legally entering through the ports of entry. About 285,000 passenger vehicles and 81,000 trucks, maritime containers, and rail cars cross our border every day. And one of the greatest challenges that the agency is facing is 2.4 million small parcels every single day as a result of the growth of e-commerce. So that's entering through the international mail facilities and the express courier facilities. Every one of these crossings, whether it's a person, a conveyance, or a cargo shipment, is a potential pathway for something bad or someone bad to enter the country. And it's Mr. Flores' job to make sure that doesn't happen.
I'm starting to think, why did I take this job right now?
Yeah, and that's the same question I asked when I stepped into it. So Pete, let's start with that. So you're in this role now for almost a year, and you understand the incredible volumes that you're dealing with. How do you apply risk management towards the scope that you see every day?
Yeah, so thanks for that. So as mentioned, right, we have quite a diverse operation in what we're dealing with in regards to just volume, whether legitimate trade and travel, plus everything else that we're anticipating or inspecting that shouldn't be coming into the country for one reason or another. So CBP, very particular Office of Field Operations, we have a layered approach to risk management, right, on how we do that. So we really talk about advanced data, talk about intelligence, talk about targeting and screening, compliance and enforcement, and really get down to whether inspection and release on how we manage our operations. And the methodology that we have in utilizing every one of those prongs for us allows us to do that in all our operational environments, whether we're talking at a land border or a seaport, at an airport, cargo for rail or truck or express, whether we're doing that inside the United States or we're doing it outside the United States at, for instance, pre-clearance or our container security initiative or our immigration advisory program or our joint security program, and those type of pieces that we have in the United States and outside the United States, putting all that information together becomes important to us. And then what do we do with that information from a risk assessment approach? Obviously, the value of that information, the accuracy of that information, how timely that information means a lot on what our assessment is and how timely we can get through and make a risk assessment of that person, of that package, of that container, of that rail car as it's coming to the United States, as it's being loaded onto a vessel, as it's in flight, or it's arriving at our land borders, that person or thing arriving at our land borders. Depending on which environment, then we have different time frames in order to make that risk assessment. But the value of accuracy, the value of accurate information in a timely manner really allows us to handle the volumes you talked about, right? The 33 million trucks vessels, containers or rail cars coming in, the 317 million travelers that come in, or pedestrians that come in every year, right? The 86 million vehicles, passenger vehicles that come in a year. Just dealing with that type of volume requires us to really get to a point where we can count on information, where we can count on what our risk assessment is, on what those layers and approach are, the mechanism and targeting algorithms that we have in place, and then our officers to do the job. Once they have that information, they have that person in front of them, that piece of cargo in front of them, the ability to use that information, that risk assessment that was already done for them, then utilize their training and their knowledge on what happens next at the inspection point.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point that we can never overlook. As advanced as your risk assessment process is, and the technology that's deployed, the advanced targeting, the advanced data that we get, at the end of the day, the experience and the instinct of that officer on the front line makes all the difference here, right? So I think that's something we always need to keep in mind. When you work through the risk assessment process and you decide an inspection is required, various ways to go about that. The agency has been using non-intrusive inspection equipment for almost 40 years now. It's clearly a critical force multiplier to the way we inspect cargo and continue to facilitate the free flow of trade. I've been gone now 2 years, and you can see how just in 2 short years, the technology continues to mature. The capabilities are greatly different than what they were a few short years ago, and that's allowed you some different approaches to how you could deploy that technology and alter your ConOps. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Right. So as we really talk about advancement of technology, and that happens quite quickly on what technology looks like today as opposed to what it looked like tomorrow, and then provides us different opportunities on how we utilize that technology and how we embed that in the operational flow of how port operations work for us. So as we think about what technology is, we can go back to biometrics, right, and facial recognition. We talk about the algorithms that we've done there, right, and we realize, hey, we've taken a manual process of what an officer has to do at a booth in an inspection lane of making sure that the document that belongs to the person they have in front of them and they both match up. And we've taken that biometric algorithm approach and say, hey, we can automate this piece, right? It can tell us whether or not this is the person we have in front of them, and we can run that base against all the enforcement databases and tell us what that risk is for that. So as we think about what we're doing for NII and cargo, and as we put those pieces together, from creating an algorithm type of approach, right, a very manual process on review and scanning, and then how it works functionally for us. So I'll start there on how it works functionally for us from a technology approach. So as we talk about multi-energy portals and low energy portals, and we talk about high energy and radiation, we talk about all the type of equipment and technology that is out there, and how we then best utilize that based on the environment we're operating in, right? Do I have dense cargo arriving, right? Frozen produce. Do I have not so dense? Is it a passenger vehicle or is it a commercial truck? How I determine, right, the best use of that technology for an efficient process that allows me to have some confidence on what we scanned and the image analysis on what happens. So, back when it was the DFO, you were the EAC. Most of our technology was in our secondary environments, right? That's where we deployed our NII equipment. We put it in our secondary environments. So the only thing that we were scanning are those things that we felt needed to go to secondary. And that's the only universe that we really got that type of enforcement or scanning done there. So as we look at the new technology, right, how it's advanced, smaller scale, higher energies, multi-energies, what we can do about putting that prior to our inspection booths. So allowing for a more consistent and a greater universe of travelers and conveyances prior to arriving to an inspection booth where they're talking to an officer, that we are going to be able to scan more images, that we are going to be able to risk assess more on what we see arriving, and then how we tie that information back to what we're seeing at the booth, whether that's a traveler in their vehicle, or whether that's a container or a truck and a truck driver in a cab, and looking at what that history and what that makeup of that conveyance look like for us. So I think we have a lot of opportunities in regards to where technology can be deployed, how we deploy it, how we utilize that technology, and then whether or not, because our ports of entry, whether we're talking land border ports of entry on our northern or southern border, right? Geographically, there are a lot of challenges at many of our ports of entry. So at some locations, we'll have that opportunity to be able to forward lean and put those type of technologies in our pre-primary areas where it doesn't impact our current operations. It doesn't interfere with everything else that we have, all the other equipment that we're running. In other locations, we won't have that opportunity. And then how do we do that and to ensure that we're getting the best we can get from technology? So does it all go in secondary? Do we work with other countries? Canadian customs, Mexican customs, right? Do we work with them on where technology goes and sharing of images and being able to proactively work those type of measures? We do that today in rail on the southern border where we share images with our counterparts. So how do we then functionally, right, become a little bit more efficient from a security aspect, but from a process flow aspect of being able to ensure that we're meeting our security requirement along with our facilitation requirement. When it comes down to what our priorities are and what we want to accomplish, first is national security, first and foremost, right? We have a national security mission and we want to make sure we accomplish that. But we also have an economic security mission for us. And we want to make sure we accomplish that goal as well. And for us, they go hand in hand.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. You know, you mentioned about with the advancements in technologies, you want to make sure all the opportunities are realized across your ports of entry. Clearly, some very large ports and metropolitan areas, not so much of an issue. But Bogdan, when we talk about the remoteness of some of these locations, you know, the Lukeville, Arizonas, you know, the Alcan, Alaskas out there, from your experience, how are those challenges being reduced through the technology of today, through the connectivity opportunities?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of aspects to that, right? Technology advances extremely fast. We're talking about satellite, and that's been changing extremely rapidly. We're talking LEOs, MEOs, GEOs, different orbit level satellites. We're talking fiber that's being deployed at a 5G. Like, there's so much marketing out there about look at all this connectivity. The reality is that the further you are out in a more denied environment you are, the more difficult it is to connect those places. And you cannot rely on a single type of technology usually for the reliability and the uptime. Because as we just talked about, there's 1.1 million passengers per day, entries per day. You cannot do that if you take 30 minutes per passenger. You can't. It's not possible. So you have to make real-time assessment, real-time acquisition. That means the data that's collected has to be sent to something that will help you make that decision immediately. Without that communication, the port of entry will significantly slow down. You will not be able to actually process all that. So, and this multitude of complexity of technology, it's expanding. It's not slowing down. Because you've got 5G, there's three flavors of it. You've got millimeter wave, mid-range, and you've got low frequency, like 600 megahertz, 700 megahertz spectrum. And dealing with that from an officer's perspective should not be the how do I fix it, how do I make it work, how do I troubleshoot it. It has to be extremely simple. So I think there's two aspects of it. It's like, how do you take the complexity of the communications world, that's a multitude of technologies, whether it's satellite, RF, or wire, or cellular, or beyond line of sight, or other methods, and put that all together into a simple to use method that's always there, that in case one of the technology fails, it still stays up and it's still able to communicate and stable to transmission, because then the port of entry will continue to operate. It will be able to continue to do the job that it needs to do, allow legal packages, individuals to come through and make sure that they identify that threat. Because if we have our officers only depend on AI and AI is not connected, that's a challenge. Taking that human aspect, it's going to be very difficult. You cannot take it completely out, of course. But technology, as we said, it's a force multiplier for this stuff. And communication is extremely important for the backhaul. So having the ability to do multi-SATCOM connectivity with the current available wireless environment, and I think Chief Ortiz talked about the cost of technology this morning, which is extremely important. So how do you optimize that in real time so that you don't pay the dollars that you don't need to pay at that moment in time? So you can't be on cellular that's going to be paid by the drink, or in an unlimited world that after 22 gigabytes it slows down depending what kind of plan you have. There's nothing that they have to worry about. It should just work. They care about green, red, yellow, and have a look at this person further, or I need to kind of put them in secondary to get additional information. So simplicity and simplifying the complexity that's out there of the multitude of connections, I think, is really important.
That's great. That's great. So let's pivot a little bit from the advancements in technology and the placement, your con-ops with the technology. Let's talk about the placement of your officers and how they're addressing having more image analysis and things out there. I know there's been some pilots in Brownsville about a command center concept. Can you give us kind of an update on how that's gone, if you've realized any efficiencies through that?
Sure. So I'll just kind of echo some of the comments there just on reliability, right, on expectations. So for us in CBP, and in particular OFO, right, when we talk, seconds matter for us. So when we're talking about passengers arriving, when we're talking about queries through enforcement databases from a security standpoint, from a national security standpoint, making sure that we're making our best assessment, right? Seconds matter, and the reliability of that information coming back to the officer that's doing that assessment, whether it's an officer in the booth or an officer in a command center, all those seconds matter. When we really talk about processing of individuals, right, when we're talking about conveyances, right, we have markers. How many seconds should it take an officer to process a trusted traveler person? How long should it take for a CT pack conveyance? How long should it take for just a general traffic person or somebody with RFI technology in a ready lane, right? We have markers and assessments on how we're doing that. And when you talk about busy locations, whether we're dealing with Express or 321s, or we're dealing with a port of entry like a San Isidro, where you have, 50,000 cars arriving every day, right? And we have 30 booths open. We already have a 2-hour backup, right? Every second matters when we're doing that assessment. Then you talk about the threats that we deal with whether that's fentanyl or meth, and just the volume of hard narcotics that we're dealing with. We talk about the terrorism aspect of what we're dealing with. So, all that matters for us. So as we look to advance how we do things and where we can do that from, our ability to pull information to whatever location it is we need it becomes important. Right? How rapid that information flow can get there. So in Brownsville, we have started a command center concept. So previously, as you're aware, right, if we had a high energy system, or we had a Z portal system, or we had a low energy, we had something that was 1 or 2 people sitting right there with that machine making an assessment as that traffic flowed through that piece of machinery. So it was very centric to location and what type of operation that was, what type of equipment, what type of training those officers had, where it was, and how we operated and how we did things, which made it difficult from an operator standpoint. As an operator, right, then I have to know how many people I have trained in this equipment, that equipment, this equipment. How many people do I have in shift? And do I have enough people to run all these type of equipments at different locations, across on bridges, on shifts, at locations, on ports of entry? So as we try to consolidate what we're doing, in Brownsville, what we've done is we have 5 or 6 pieces of different equipment. We've consolidated those scans into one central location. So I have a room with some officers, and we're adjudicating images real time as the scan is happening and making a determination on whether or not that conveyance, commercial or private, needs to go into secondary, or we need to take a further examination of it. Now, the reliability of the systems and what we're doing and how we're doing that, right now it's working for us on kind of where we are. So now the question for us is, right, from a large scale piece, how much of this can we do? Right? Can I centralize every piece of equipment at a port of entry into one location? Could I centralize every port of entry into one location in a field office, right? And do that adjudication from there on what we're doing from a cargo side. And then how do I get that information to the officer on the ground that needs it in order to say, hey, we have an anomaly here. here's what it looks like, here's what you should be looking for, right? Whether you're using tablets or smartphones, and how we get those images to them for that recognition on where they should be looking based on what we know that anomaly to be. We've also, on a passenger side, started to also do that as well. So in Brownsville, right, we're looking at from a passenger standpoint where we've consolidated multiple ports of entry into one location, right? We've even consolidated a checkpoint into that review and consolidation. So we're bringing images from various locations, pulling it all together for our operators to have a review, look at it, adjudicate it, and then send that answer back real time. And as we think about what we want to do from a pre-primary perspective, right? So we're going to put this equipment out prior to the inspection booth. So depending on how far that piece of equipment is from our inspection booth, right, how many seconds or minutes do we have to adjudicate, right, that image before it gets to an inspection booth? How do I relay that information to that officer in that inspection booth in order for it to be released or be referred to secondary? So I think conceptually, right, based on where we are from a technology perspective, look into how we consolidate resources, how we use that type of technology in common viewer type perspective, where it doesn't matter to my officer I have behind that screen what type of equipment they're looking at. What it matters to them is the platform they're viewing that image on and making that a risk assessment there.
Right, right. So Bogdan, in terms of that, in terms of different manufacturers, proprietary systems versus open architecture, your thoughts on that as to what best supports the end user?
Well, I think it's really important to keep it open architecture as developers out there and manufacturers are building such equipment and be able to communicate with each other. You have to keep it to some sort of an open standard, but it has to be secured, encrypted, and able to be protected, because some of the data is very critical to be able to be transferred and be able to adjudicate in real time. One of the things that, again, it goes back to a very simple reliability of comms. Earlier today, I think we talked about AI/ML. AI/ML will start helping with this significantly, in the sense of if you watch an image, you can only watch that image for someone. You need a break. Your eyes will need a break after a certain amount of time, because as the human brain will evaluate that image, will not be able to detect the anomalies in that image all the time. They get tired. It's human nature. So as machines do not. So they can repeat and rinse the exact same thing over and over and over again. But again, it's more like how do you provide actionable intelligence to the officer in an open framework? With other words, some sort of open API around that, the ability to communicate back and forth, the ability to send that back in a reliable fashion so the officers can make the right decisions or the best possible decisions to adjudicate that environment. It's the volume is only going to go up.
Right.
So therefore you have to deal with that. And in order to deal with that, you need to have manufacturers be able to communicate with each other. One of the things we just mentioned on this conversation was around technology lifetime. I think technology lifetime will be significantly longer if we operate in a open environment. The cost has to come into the total cost of ownership for the stuff has to come into the mix of it, and I think it's really, really important that decisions are done in a 5-year world, even though cell phones are being changed every 2 years, because that's the world we're going in right now. Every 2 years we got a new technology, a new communication device, a new everything. However, does everything really change? No. Some of the fundamental decisions are the exact same, except we may need more CPU, we may need more memory, we may need more GPU processing, we need more bandwidth. So these are all limited resources that we have to consider when we're deploying such systems, because it's not an infinite pot of money and the budgets are not going up at the same rate. I mean, we heard that this morning. So it's important to kind of manage that while also providing the money for industry to be able to manage all that stuff. But, right.
And you touch on a good point. I mean, as more technology gets deployed in a pre-primary arena, much more drive-through scanning, much more images. Pete, your workforce is static at best, right? How are you going to keep up on that? Bogdan talked about AI and machine learning, the automatic threat recognition that we've talked about for years. Where is OFO in that regard?
So I think in general, in the passenger type environment, right? We've come a lot further in that type of technology, right? So when we talk about the cargo environment, right, we're kind of learning to do this in the cargo environment. The different types of commodities, what we have, as we talk about what a commodity is, right? When we talk about advanced information, how good is that advanced information that we're getting on that commodity coming in? And then how do we then tie that to an image and what's it supposed to look like? And if it doesn't look like what it's supposed to look like, right, then how do we define what that is for our officers and get to an adjudication in order to allow that learning to work? I think for us, as we really increase what our scanning is going to be with the current budgets that we have and money that we do have for NII, right, we understand that the staffing we have today compared to the number of scans potentially we will be doing, right, we need a solution.
Yeah.
We need a solution on how we're going to adjudicate the number of scans and images that we anticipate that we're going to get to. So as we get to there, right, we're going to have some AI. We're going to have automated threat recognition for our officers as they attempt to adjudicate these images in seconds in all environments. So what we're planning to do as we go down this road, so beginning of next year, right, we do plan to have announced through beta.sam.gov, right, a proposal on an industry day. That's what we're planning to do. And in that announcement in that industry day, we will put our proposal out there and the requirements on kind of what we want to have done based on, and we're still developing the technical requirements, right? So we really talk about building what we call a sandbox, right? Having the ability to put some images in a secured platform in a sanitized way with limited access to data and images and see what industry has in regards to being able to advance the AI and automated threat technology on what we're seeing. So giving access to images that we currently captured, some limited data information, pushing that together in a sandbox to allow industry to show what the capabilities are and how do we get better at developing that type of capability from an automated threat recognition piece. It's going to be important for us as we really expand what our bandwidth is. And as we really talk about adjudication, right, what we need to, that needs to happen prior to, again, as I talked about, prior to getting to the officers. I need some type of feedback to that officer in a booth prior to that shipment, that container, that truck, that person, that personal vehicle getting to that primary booth. So as we work through those, that's going to be an important aspect on how we do that. And then, you know, as we really talk long-term personnel and what that looks like, just who's doing all that adjudication for us and how do we handle that adjudication.
I think that's good because I know that from the private sector, that's always been an open question is in order for them to help develop algorithms that are effective, they need access to the live data, to the actual stream of commerce data. And how does CBP get that out to the outside entities so they can help this out, these algorithms and such? So you think that's going to be coming out sometime in the early spring?
So that'll probably be out maybe before spring, we're hoping, as far as that announcement comes out. As we get the technical requirements together, and we'll try to include as much of that in our proposal. That way, industry understands kind of what the ask is, what the requirements are, as they come in and try to develop and help with that algorithm approach from an AI, from an automated threat recognition.
We have time for. Oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna add to this. One thing that's really important as this is being developed, the sandbox is being developed, the opportunities out there. It's also important to highlight the limitations that exist at these ports of entry, capacity, for example. So I know for a fact Calexico, I think, has got 8 lanes of truck traffic coming in, so you're crossing about 64 trucks an hour. That was sort of my understanding. We're working on something similar. And the images, it's in the order of 70 to 100 images that have to be transferred. And these are high resolution. And so now you got to go process that image at the edge, transfer it, make a decision at Jets, provide that to the officer so they can make a decision before that driver comes up, and it needs to be done in real time. So the algorithms are fine, but also consider the limitations that you're dealing with at the edge, because you're not going to have infinite cloud compute available to you all the time for all that data. You can't transfer it fast enough because the capacity was significant. Like the throughput, I don't think I can talk about, but it was very low what was available at that point in time.
That's good. That's good. It's been a good discussion. I know we're just about out of time here, but when Mr. Aguilar opened up the conference earlier today, he challenged the industry. He said, what more can you do to support the frontline officers? When I sat in Pete's chair, one of the greatest frustrations I had in terms of the NII program was that there was a lack of a dedicated, consistent funding stream year after year. We had some very good years and we had some very bad years where we barely covered, the operation and maintenance for the equipment that existed. If there was one thing that I would really like to see done better is that CBP has that dedicated funding that they can count on for NII every year, so they can project out what their refresh needs are, how they can add capacity there. If you look at the TSA, they have a model where from passenger screening fees, they carve out a certain allocation every year. Right now, it's geared towards the checked baggage screening. It's hopefully going to be applied as well to the checkpoint screening baggage. I would love to see a similar model supporting CBP, where from all the user fees that you collect, the customs, the immigration, the agriculture, billions of dollars of user fees that CBP collects that go back into the general fund, that at the start of each appropriation cycle, there is a dedicated carve-out that can help the industry provide the necessary technology in real time. I think it's good for national security. It's good for the economy. Right now with the vendors, they moderate their capacity, their production capacity, because they can't predict long-term whether it's going to be a good year or not a good year. If there was a known dedicated NII appropriations that was coming, I believe the production manufacturers could produce that advanced technology quicker. When CBP gets a good year, now Pete waits 24 months before he sees that equipment. So if there's one charge I could leave the group with as we close out today, would be how can CBP work with Congress, work with the administration to receive a dedicated NII appropriations every year that they could count on, that they could use for the projections, and that those vendors that provide that equipment could also rely on. Again, I think there's clear national security benefits as well as economic benefits, and I will leave you with that. So I know Megan's kicking me out, but I appreciate the time and the attention you gave. I appreciate our panelists, Pete, Bogdan. Nice to see you both, and thank you for your time today.
Thank you.